Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of dense source material, strip away the jargon, and really give you the foundational knowledge you need to be truly well-informed. Today, we are wading into one of the most complicated and, I think, often misunderstood conditions in women's health: chronic pain associated with endometriosis. We're focusing on what's called endometriosis-associated pain, or EAP. Now, if you or someone you know has ever struggled with this, the conventional wisdom suggests the pain is what's directly caused by the physical lesions.
Right, the tissue growing outside the uterus. You just assume, remove the tissue, fix the problem.
Exactly. You picture surgery as the clear fix.
But here's the critical and really counterintuitive insight that's going to be the central theme for our entire deep dive today, and it's right there in the source material.
What is it?
The severity of the pain a person experiences often correlates poorly with the physical extent of the disease you can actually see during a laparoscopy.
That's the paradox, isn't it? That just fundamentally has to shift our understanding. Our sources highlight these profound examples. You have individuals presenting with what you can only describe as catastrophic, debilitating pain.
Awful pain.
And when they go into surgery, they find minimal, almost negligible disease. It barely shows up.
And then the reverse. You have people with extensive, severe stage 5 disease, lesions everywhere, and they report absolutely no pain symptoms whatsoever.
So this disconnect, it's more than just a medical curiosity.
Oh, it's everything. It tells us that treating EAP just as a structural problem that you can cut out it's fundamentally incomplete.
So our mission today is to move beyond just the physical lesions. We need to understand the mechanisms that are responsible for the pain starting and, critically, the neurological mechanisms that make that pain stick around and become chronic.
We're really focusing on a disease of the nervous system and pain processing, not just misplaced tissue.
And to crack this wide open, we have to introduce the three sort of central pillars that explain this complexity. These are the key concepts driving all of our sources.
Right, we're talking about peripheral sensitization, central sensitization, and cross-sensitization.
And these mechanisms, they represent a kind of progressive neurological rewiring, right? Shifting pain from just a symptom of an injury
to the disease itself. The pain is the disease.
And the ultimate proof that this rewiring is happening is really in the big picture. EAP is so rarely a solitary condition.
So true.
It's frequently complicated by other persistent pain syndromes involving nearby organs, the bladder, the bowel, the muscles.
Which just screams that these separate pain issues are actually sharing common wiring. It points us right back to these sensitization pathways. It's a network failure, not just a local short circuit.
A network failure. I like that. Okay, let's dive in.
All right, so to start, let's just quickly establish the groundwork. Endometriosis is a complex estrogen-dependent disorder. It's characterized by the presence of endometrium-like glands and stroma outside the uterus.
And it's surprisingly common. The sources put the cumulative prevalence at around 11% in affected individuals.
11%. Yeah, that's a huge number. And when we look at how this condition develops, the pathogenesis, the material is quick to remind us that the causes are, well, they're still not fully defined.
It's not a simple single cause.
Never. It's a multi-layered process. It involves this interplay of predisposing factors, initiating factors, and then propagating factors.
Okay, that holistic view is essential. So let's start with those predisposing factors. What makes someone vulnerable in the first place?
Well, it includes both genetic and anatomical vulnerabilities. Genetically, the risk is substantial. If you have first-degree relatives or a twin with endometriosis, your risk is significantly increased.
And often for the more severe forms of the disease, too.
Exactly.
The sources mention these genome-wide association studies, or GWASS, identifying specific genetic variants. What does that actually tell us about the underlying biology?
It tells us the genetic predisposition isn't just some vague inheritance. I mean, the identified variants are specifically linked to things like inflammatory pathways, cell adhesion.
Which is how cells stick together.
Right, and growth factors and hormone receptors. So the stage is set genetically for a body that might be hyperresponsive to inflammation, or maybe has trouble clearing out those displaced cells.
And what about the anatomical factors? What can physically predispose someone to this?
Anatomical factors are often related to how menstrual flow exits the body. So things like Mullerian abnormalities or anything that causes an outflow tract obstruction.
And that leads us right to the first and most widely accepted initiating factor, right? Sampson's hypothesis.
Retrograde menstruation, yeah. This is the idea most people are familiar with, that endometrial fragments flow backward through the fallopian tubes and into the peritoneal cavity.
And there's a lot of evidence for this.
Oh, absolutely. The increased risk you see with anatomical obstructions or early menarche or short menstrual cycles, it all suggests that a greater volume or frequency of that backward flow increases the chance of the condition taking hold.
But the challenge to that theory is always the same. Most women experience some degree of retrograde menstruation, but only about 1 in 10 develop endometriosis.
Exactly. So there have to be other ways for the process to start.
Which brings in this other theory, coalomic metaplasia.
Right. This theory suggests that cells within the peritoneum, the lining of your abdominal cavity, can just spontaneously transform, or metaplase, into endometrial-like cells.
And this is crucial because it explains the cases that retrograde menstruation just can't.
It does. It accounts for the rare cases you see in prepubescent girls, or in males exposed to estrogen, or when lesions appear way outside the pelvis, like in the thoracic cavity.
So once a lesion is initiated, the body then has to fail to clear it. That's where the propagating factors come in, what makes it stick around and grow.
And this is where we really start to pivot toward pain, because the propagating factors are overwhelmingly driven by inflammation and immune system dysfunction. Endometriosis is fundamentally an inflammatory and immunological disease.
So it's an enhanced inflammatory response.
In the peritoneal cavity, yes, plus alterations in the local immune system that lead to defective apoptosis.
Meaning the cells that are supposed to die off just don't.
They don't. They stick around.
Yeah.
And then you have the hormonal component,
Progesterone resistance.
a key factor. In endometriosis lesions, the cells don't respond normally to progesterone, which usually helps regulate and quiet the endometrium. This failure to respond keeps the lesions active, inflamed, and prone to growth.
So it establishes this constant internal inflammatory signal.
Which, as we're about to see, is absolutely central to sensitizing the nerves.
Before we get to the mechanisms, let's just quickly list the actual symptoms that make up EAP. It's not just one thing.
No, it's so much more than just painful periods or dysmenorrhea. While that is a hallmark symptom, it also includes non-cyclical, persistent pelvic pain that can last all month long.
And then there's the cyclical pain related to organ function.
Yes, painful urination, which is dysuria, painful defecation or dyschezia, and often severely painful deep intercourse, deep dyspareunia. It can be a total pelvic crisis.
So to really understand EAP, we need to be precise with our language. Let's start with how the experts define pain itself, from the International Association for the Study of Pain, the IASP.
The IASP defines pain as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage. And I want you to notice that word emotional in there.
Right, it's not just a physical sensation.
Exactly. Even at a clinical level, the definition tells us pain is not just a nerve impulse leading to perception. It is sensory and emotional, two sides of the same coin right from the start.
And when we talk about pain lasting a long time, the authors make a point of terminology. They prefer persistent pelvic pain, or PPP, over chronic. Why is that?
Well, chronic can sometimes imply something is untreatable or just long-lasting. The term persistent pelvic pain, which is defined as pain coming from the pelvis that persists for over 6 months, puts the emphasis on the ongoing, active nature of the pain process.
So it reinforces the idea that something is actively maintaining the pain signal. It's not just that time has passed.
Precisely.
This focus on persistence leads to a really specific official clinical designation that captures the complexity of this whole experience, the endometriosis-associated pain syndrome, or EAPS.
And EAPS is crucial. It's a high-level recognition that the pain is the problem, not just the lesion. It's defined as persistent or recurrent pelvic pain in individuals with a laparoscopic diagnosis of endometriosis,
And here's the key part.
where the symptoms persist even after adequate treatment and are associated with cognitive, behavioral, sexual, or emotional consequences.
Let's just underscore that element, pain that persists after you've surgically treated the lesions.
Yeah.
That explicitly validates the central premise of this whole deep dive, that the physical presence of the tissue is no longer the only thing driving the suffering.
Precisely. If the lesions are gone or minimized, but the person is still in pain, that pain signal is being maintained by the central nervous system. The source material really drives this home by stressing that the physical phenotype, or, the severity of the visible lesions, may be less relevant than the underlying pain processing mechanisms.
In fact, it says in many cases it's genuinely unclear if the endometriosis is the true cause, or if it's just coexisting with a broader pain processing disorder.
And that's the framework we have to adopt as we move into the neurological landscape.
Okay, let's unpack this nervous system model. Let's start right where the trouble begins, at the local sites of the endometriotic lesions. We need to understand which nerves are being stimulated and how.
Okay, so the initial generation of EAP involves stimulating nerve fibers throughout the pelvis, primarily in two different types of tissue. You have the parietal peritoneum, which lines the abdominal wall, and then the visceral tissues, which are the organs themselves.
And these two types of tissue tell the brain very different things about pain.
Very different. Let's start with the parietal peritoneum. It's highly innervated with well-defined sensory and sympathetic fibers. Because it lines the wall, its nerves are wired to sense acute, localized sensations.
Like what?
Pressure, touch, friction, cutting, temperature. If you get a cut on your skin, that's a parietal-typed pain. It's sharp, it's specific, and it's easy to pinpoint.
And the visceral tissues, the organs, how does their pain signal work?
Visceral tissue, the uterus, bowel, bladder, is innervated by the autonomic nervous system, mostly with unmyelinated sensory neurons. These nerves sense stretching, tearing, distension, and contraction.
So the pain is duller, harder to locate.
Much harder. It feels deeper. And here's a crucial detail. Some of these unmyelinated nerve endings lie just below the peritoneal surface, which allows them to constantly sample the peritoneal fluid itself for any noxious stimuli.
And that brings us to the chemical environment. That peritoneal fluid, saturated by the constant activity of the lesions, is like a corrosive bath for those nerve endings.
It is absolute chemical warfare at the local level. I mean, the lesions are constantly dumping inflammatory mediators into the peritoneal cavity. We see hugely elevated levels of molecular signals called cytokines, things like interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, which are central drivers of inflammation.
And you mentioned chemokines earlier. What's their role in all this?
Chemokines like monocyte chemotactic protein 1 are basically molecular air traffic controllers. They send out signals to recruit more immune cells to the area, which just keeps the inflammation persistent and ongoing.
So if you've got this constant inflammatory soup, always irritating those exposed nerve endings. Now, we used to think this inflammation was primarily caused by the lesions bleeding cyclically, didn't we? That they were just mini menstruations happening outside the uterus.
That was the common intuitive assumption. I mean, if they're endometrial tissue, they must bleed when the actual endometrium bleeds. But recent data really challenges this.
How so?
We now know endometriotic lesions rarely cycle in synchrony with the utopic endometrium.
So if they aren't synchronized, what's causing all the irritation?
Well, hemorrhage is observed, but it happens throughout the menstrual cycle, not just during the period. And it's caused not by synchronized shedding, but by intense local inflammation and angiogenesis.
The formation of new, fragile blood vessels.
Exactly. And this is a critical distinction. The pain mechanism is driven by constant localized inflammation sustained by the lesions, independent of the monthly cycle. And that helps explain why so many women experience non-cyclical constant pain.
This constant chemical attack leads us to that first stage of neurological rewiring, peripheral sensitization. How do we define that simply?
Peripheral sensitization is when the local alarm system becomes hair trigger sensitive. It's an increased responsiveness and a reduced threshold of the nociceptive neurons in the periphery. Pain persistence in EAP is fundamentally associated with this mechanism.
It's like turning the sensitivity on a smoke detector all the way up so that just normal air movement sets it off.
That's a perfect analogy. And the sources show that the physical environment of the nerves actually changes dramatically as well.
How does it change?
Well, the lesions don't just exist. They actively recruit and proliferate new nerves. You find significantly more nerve fibers right in the endometriotic lesions compared with normal, healthy peritoneum.
And this is especially true for the more severe forms, like deep infiltrating endometriosis.
Yes, DIE and lesions in the rectovaginal septum show much higher nerve fiber density than the superficial lesions do.
And is there a measurable link between this extra wiring and what the patient actually experiences?
Absolutely. The increased density of a specific type of nerve fiber, which contains calcitonin gene-related peptide, or CGRP, positively correlates with reported pain severity.
And CGRP is a potent driver of pain transmission?
A very potent driver. So more CGRP-positive nerves means a larger, louder pathway to send pain signals up to the brain.
And it's not just the density. The actual receptors on the nerve endings become hypersensitive too.
Yes, the classic example is the TRPV1 receptor. This is the receptor that's famous for responding to capsaicin, the compound that makes chili peppers hot. It's a key player in nociceptive or pain signaling.
And its density is increased in the lesions.
Dramatically increased.
So you have an area that's already inflamed, and now it has a massive increase in the very receptors that are designed to feel burning heat and irritation.
That's it exactly. The nerves aren't just more numerous, they have more docking stations for irritants, and their baseline response is already elevated. This increase in TRPV1 density has been clinically linked to increasingly severe dysmenorrhea.
What's driving this proliferation of nerves and blood vessels in the first place?
It's the neurotrophins and growth factors we mentioned earlier. The process is called neuroangiogenesis, new nerves, new blood vessels. The peritoneal fluid is rich in things like nerve growth factor, or NGF, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF.
And also VEGF and TGF-beta.
Right. And all of these are essentially fertilizer for new nerve growth, ensuring that the peripheral sensitization is robust and self-sustaining.
Okay, now let's talk about the mechanism that sounds the most invasive. Perineural invasion, or PNI. We usually associate that term with cancer.
It is a sobering finding. Perineural invasion is the mechanism where the endometriotic tissue physically migrates or integrates along the nerve fibers. It uses them like highways.
So this isn't just chemical irritation anymore.
No, this is physical invasion of the nerve sheath itself.
And the clinical consequence of PNI.
It's severe. In deep infiltrating endometriosis, PNI is associated with the dramatically higher pain scores, increased dysmenorrhea, and deep dyspareunia. And this is key. It often causes pain that feels like it's following a nerve root.
Like sciatica.
Exactly, sometimes manifesting as sciatica or unilateral leg pain. That shooting electrical nerve root pain can often be traced back to this invasion. And this aggressive mechanism is highly correlated with the intense local secretion of NGF and TGF-beta by the lesions.
And just to round out this section, what role does the autonomic nervous system, the involuntary system, play in all this?
We know the ANS is dysregulated. Some lesions show a local loss of sympathetic nerve fibers while the sensory fibers remain unchanged. This imbalance, where the inflammatory state seems to be chasing away the calming sympathetic nerves, is linked to chronic inflammation.
But the exact contribution to pain is still a bit unclear.
It's still being researched, but the theory suggests that losing that regulatory control locally allows the sensory alarm system to just run unchecked, further amplifying that peripheral sensitization.
So if the periphery is the local alarm system going haywire, central sensitization is when the entire control room, the spinal cord and brain, gets overloaded and starts screaming at full volume.
Yes, even when the original input is mild. This is the stage where the pain truly becomes a disorder of the nervous system itself.
It's the volume knob turned all the way up.
That's a great way to put it. Central sensitization is the heightened excitability of the entire central nervous system in response to noxious stimuli. After that continuous recurrent signaling from the periphery, which is what peripheral sensitization provides, the pain-sensing neurons in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord become hyperexcitable.
So they're constantly primed for a pain signal.
They're more than primed. They're stuck on high alert. This leads to a decreased pain threshold and an increased pain response. And what's more, this excitability spreads to surrounding nerve roots. That's a process called central facilitation.
Which means signals that used to be non-painful
Like gentle clothing pressure or slight muscle movement.
now register as highly painful.
That's right.
Clinically, how do we actually observe this in patients?
The definitive clinical sign is hyperalgesia, which is an exaggerated response to a genuinely painful stimulus. And women with EAP and persistent pelvic pain clearly demonstrate this when compared to healthy controls. The intensity of their pain response is just disproportionate to the intensity of the stimulus.
But what I found most shocking in the sources was the suggestion that chronic pain may not just change how the brain works, but that it leads to structural changes, actual physical alterations in the brain.
This is where the deep dive gets really compelling. Functional MRI and PT imaging have allowed researchers to look inside the brains of people with EAP, and what they found is a reduced volume in critical areas of the brain associated with chronic pain processing.
Reduced volume. Can we elaborate on which specific regions are involved and why their shrinkage is so significant?
Absolutely. We're talking about key relay and processing centers: the thalamus, the insula, and the putamen.
Okay, so the thalamus is the major relay station for sensory input.
Right. A reduction there suggests a dysfunction in the core mechanism that determines what signals get prioritized to the cortex. Then you have the insula, which is crucial because it processes the emotional and subjective perception of pain alongside body awareness.
So a change there means a structural change in the part of the brain that integrates the feeling and meaning of the pain.
Precisely. And the putamen is involved in motor control and habit formation. Its change might reflect how pain becomes an involuntary, ingrained bodily habit. The hypothesis is that this reduction in volume is due to neuronal atrophy cells shrinking or even neurodegeneration.
So chronic pain, over time, is literally eroding parts of the brain dedicated to handling it.
That's what the evidence suggests.
And beyond the physical size, there's also the issue of connectivity. How is the brain communicating differently?
We see altered functional connectivity. Specifically, women with EAP show increased resting state connectivity between pain processing regions, particularly involving the anterior insula.
So it's like a dedicated high-speed fiber optic cable, constantly linking the fear, distress, and sensory perception centers of the brain.
A perfect description. This heightened communication is observed even when they're resting, compared to women who have endometriosis without pain or healthy controls. The system is always on, always connected, always engaged in pain signaling.
And finally, let's revisit the stress response. Chronic pain is chronic stress. How does the body's main stress regulator, the HPA axis, cope?
Well, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis is designed to regulate stress and return the body to equilibrium. When you face acute pain, it releases cortisol.
But with the nonstop barrage of chronic pain signals?
The HPA axis stress response starts to hypoattenuate. It diminishes. It becomes exhausted.
So the body stops responding effectively to the crisis.
Exactly. Studies show that women with dysmenorrhea have reduced baseline levels of cortisol compared to pain-free women. It suggests the internal system that manages stress and inflammation is just worn out.
Which adds another layer to central sensitization. Not only is the pain volume knob stuck on 11,
but the body's ability to use its natural anti-stress mechanisms to calm the system down is depleted.
this concept of central sensitization brings us perfectly to the final piece of the puzzle, cross-sensitization. This explains why EAP never stays neatly confined to the site of the lesions.
Cross-sensitization is where nociceptive inputs pain signals from one diseased tissue, say the uterus, start to impact the perception of pain coming from normal tissue that's nearby.
It's signal bleed.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It's where the chronic pain starts to jump the tracks and activate neighboring nerve pathways.
And this is the key to understanding why women with endometriosis so often suffer from bladder symptoms or pain during defecation, even if those organs look perfectly healthy.
That is precisely it. The physical basis for this is called viscero-visceral convergence. Afferent nerves from different pelvic organs, the bladder, the colon, the uterus, the vagina, all travel through the same spinal cord segments and converge onto similar areas in the dorsal horn.
So the pain signals are all piling up in the same hallway of the spinal cord.
Yes. And when the uterine nerves are constantly screaming due to peripheral sensitization, the neurons in the spinal cord become highly excitable. That's central sensitization. Because the bladder and bowel nerves share that exact same central spinal neuron, the brain starts to interpret any signal from that shared neuron as pain.
Even if the signal originated innocently from a full bladder or just normal bowel movement.
Exactly. And we also see this phenomenon involving the muscles.
That's somatovisceral convergence.
Right. Cross-sensitization between the pelvic floor muscles, which are somatic tissue, and the pelvic viscera, the internal organs. Pain from the lesions causes a protective clenching and guarding in the muscles, which sends strong sensitized signals back to the spine,
Which then amplifies the visceral pain.
creating a vicious, painful feedback loop.
It's amazing to think about the evolutionary context here. Why would the body even be set up with these shared pathways?
Well, it's hypothesized that these pathways evolved for efficient coordination of critical pelvic organ functions, urination, defecation, sexual function. But endometriosis causes a maladaptation of this efficient system,
The relentless, intense input from the lesions corrupts the shared wiring.
turning coordination into pain. The clinical term for this outcome is visceral hyperalgesia. It means increased pain experienced in one organ, often a non-diseased one, because of a problem in a neighboring diseased organ. And it contributes significantly to the overall suffering.
And it's crucial we reinforce that the definition of EAPS explicitly includes the cognitive, behavioral, and emotional consequences. The experience of persistent pain is fundamentally a function of biological, psychological, and social factors all interacting.
It's the biopsychosocial model in action. There's a strong bidirectional association here. Persistent pelvic pain causes mood disorders, and mood disorders amplify pain. We see high levels of anxiety, depression, and other psychiatric disorders in individuals with endometriosis.
And this is explained by the shared neurological pathways and the chronic stress load.
Yes, and these psychosocial factors aren't abstract. They have a physical impact on pain processing at all levels, peripheral, central, and local. For instance, pain catastrophizing. That tendency to ruminate, magnify, and feel helpless about pain is a massive amplifier.
So if you're anticipating pain or paying increased attention to every sensation in your pelvis,
That heightened mental state sends signals down to the spinal cord that prime and sensitize those central neurons even further.
so anxiety or depression isn't just something you feel because you hurt. It's actively driving the volume knob of the central nervous system higher.
Exactly. It's a vicious, self-perpetuating feedback loop. Chronic pain causes understandable distress, but that distress, mediated through cognitive and emotional centers in the brain, actively facilitates and reinforces the central sensitization process, making the pain experience dramatically worse and more persistent.
So addressing the cognitive and emotional factors is a physical requirement for treating the pain disorder.
It has to be part of the plan.
This third section is really the ultimate evidence that the whole sensitization theory holds up. If EAP is a disorder of nerve processing and cross-sensitization, then we should see it rarely standing alone.
Right. It should be frequently complicated by other pelvic pain syndromes that share those exact same mechanisms.
And do we?
We do. The data is compelling. The high rates of overlapping pain conditions validate the entire model of central and cross-sensitization. While we could look at broader conditions like fibromyalgia, we're focusing on the pelvic comorbidities because they're the clearest example of this shared wiring.
Okay, let's start with the bladder. Bladder pain syndrome, or BPS. It's defined by pelvic pain associated with lower urinary tract symptoms like urgency and frequency when there's no infection.
The comorbidity right here is staggering, and it just validates that visceral-visceral convergence model. In women diagnosed with endometriosis, the coexisting rate of BPS is massive. We're talking between 43 and 60%.
Wow. That's nearly half to two-thirds of affected individuals experiencing concurrent, often debilitating bladder symptoms.
And the data goes even further than just coexistence. It suggests a causative link.
How so?
Longitudinal studies show that women with an endometriosis diagnosis have a fourfold risk of being diagnosed with BPS within just 3 years.
A fourfold risk.
It suggests the inflammatory and sensitizing environment created by the endometriosis dramatically increases the vulnerability to developing BPS.
And what are the shared mechanisms that make them such close companions?
BPS is also driven by two factors we now know well: inflammation and central sensitization. Like endometriosis, BPS involves localized inflammation with high levels of mediators like IL-6 and TNF-α. But critically, BPS is also mediated by central pain amplification.
So the bladder signals are being misinterpreted by an already sensitized central nervous system.
It's a direct consequence of the crosstalk we just discussed.
Okay, moving to the gut. Irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, a functional disorder defined by abdominal pain related to defecation or changes in bowel habits. How does the gut fit into this sensitization model?
Again, the overlap is dramatic. The rate of IBS in women with endometriosis can be as high as 60%. And if you look at younger populations, 24% of adolescents with endometriosis reported concurrent IBS, and that concurrent diagnosis was directly linked to increased overall pain severity.
Why do these two conditions go hand in hand so often?
Well, the pathogenesis of IBS relates to altered gut-brain interactions. Just like EAP, IBS shows clear evidence of peripheral sensitization in the gut lining. That includes the increased activation of that pain receptor we talked about earlier.
The TRPV1 receptor, the chili pepper receptor.
The very same. If you have increased capsaicin-like receptors in your gut, your bowel is going to be hyperreactive.
And the central component.
The central component is massive. The altered visceral sensation and pain experienced in IBS stem directly from central sensitization. Imaging studies show changes in the activation of brain regions linked to emotional arousal and pain modulation. The central nervous system is interpreting normal gut function as painful.
And the chronic pain from endometriosis is just feeding that central system that manages both pain experiences.
It's all the same system.
Next up, the muscles. We're looking at abdominopelvic myalgia, which means pain, tenderness, or hyperalgesia in the abdominal or pelvic muscles. Often this manifests as pelvic floor muscle tension.
This is a perfect example of the somatovisceral convergence we introduced. Women with EAP are highly likely to have PFM tension. Look at the data for deep infiltrating endometriosis. PFM tension is present in nearly a third of cases.
And up to 45% show inappropriate contraction and an inability to completely relax those muscles.
That inability to relax tells you everything. The muscle is in a constant state of protective guarding. The local inflammation inflammation and constant pain signals from the lesions trigger an involuntary protective clenching.
And those tight muscles then feed more pain signals back into the central nervous system.
Through those shared dorsal horn pathways, yes, the organs hurt, so the muscles tighten, the muscles hurt, so the organs feel more pain. It becomes a relentless, self-reinforcing pain loop.
Finally, let's look at vulvodynia, which is vulvar pain lasting 3 months or more without a clear cause. The most common subtype is provoked vestibulodynia, PVD, which causes pain on touch.
The interconnectedness here really seals the deal on the sensitization model. While vulvodynia and endometriosis coexist in about 11% of individuals, look at the overlap with the other syndromes. PVD is found in 33% of general chronic pelvic pain patients.
And the most stunning figure involves the bladder connection.
Yes. PVD is reported in up to 74% of individuals who also have bladder pain syndrome.
74%.
When 3/4 of people with one pelvic pain syndrome also have another, the underlying neural processing mechanisms are identical.
And what's the defining evidence that vulvodynia is a central sensitization disorder and not just a local skin condition?
It's clinical testing that shows decreased pain thresholds in regions that are distant to the vulva. Studies show individuals with PVD have hypersensitivity. They feel pain sooner on their thumb or their deltoid muscle.
There's no lesion on their thumb.
Exactly. That distant hyperalgesia definitively proves that the entire central nervous system, that volume knob, has been turned all the way up.
And does the brain imaging mirror the EAP findings?
It does. Structural studies on PVD patients show altered gray matter volume, specifically in the sensorimotor and thalamic regions. This structural change is a hallmark shared across all these chronic overlapping pain conditions, reinforcing the idea that they are all manifestations of the same underlying central pain processing dysfunction.
So this deep dive has really fundamentally redefined endometriosis-associated pain. The core understanding we've synthesized today is that EAP is not simply a pain caused by tissue damage.
No, it is a profound, progressive disease of pain processing itself.
And the progression is so clear, local inflammation fuels peripheral sensitization,
which continuously bombards the spinal cord and brain until the system breaks down into central sensitization.
And this amplifies the pain signals and creates cross-sensitization, which explains the coexistence of IBS, BPS, and all the muscle pain.
It's an escalating neurological crisis.
The implication for you, the listener, especially if you are navigating this condition, is that your pain is real and it is physical, even if it doesn't perfectly match the size of your visible lesions.
Right. And it means that the biological, psychological, and social factors must all be addressed for effective management.
It also provides a critical roadmap for medical professionals. Screening for all comorbid pelvic pain syndromes is mandatory.
Because treating the centralization mechanisms will help alleviate the pain in all these overlapping systems. We can't just chase lesions, we have to treat the hypersensitive nervous system.
It also clarifies the direction of future research and therapy. The critical therapeutic targets are moving beyond solely surgical excision and hormonal suppression, towards treatments that can actively dial down these mechanisms.
If we can desensitize the nerves, we can treat the persistence of the pain.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider, building directly on the most surprising findings from our sources today.
We highlighted that chronic EAP is associated with structural changes, specifically reduced volume in critical pain processing areas like the thalamus and the insula. So the final question is this. If chronic pain has the power to physically change the geography of the brain in this way, does that mean that truly effective non-surgical treatment like targeted neuromodulation or advanced physical and psychological therapy must be powerful enough to physically reverse that neuronal atrophy and truly reshape the brain back toward a pain-free state?
A question that places the future of chronic pain management firmly in the hands of neurophysiology. We hope this deep dive has given you clarity and a new comprehensive framework for understanding the hidden, complicated geography of pain in endometriosis.